Hi guys, I'm going to speak in English. So my name is Alex. I was born in Russia, actually. I was born in Barnaul. It was like, I don't know, 18 years ago or something, quite a couple of years ago. Moved to Germany then, and then I found myself having a career in the US. So right now I work for Uber in San Francisco, and I'm leading the developer relations team, which means we are part of the developer platform team, and that team builds our external APIs. So I'm going to be talking about our external APIs. It's packed today in terms of content, not in terms of people, apparently. In terms of content, we have three different things I want to cover. Why would you care to build on top of our API? How did we build it? And how can you build it? Just three things. So why should you care? We're right now with Uber in 72 different countries, in multiple cities, 470 and more, and we have 1.5 million driver partners on the streets. Recently, I think just like a couple of weeks ago, we completed our 2 billionth trip worldwide, and it's a huge amount. I was just looking at this number actually and did some trivia with Wikipedia. Who of you knows how many people live in Novosibirsk? Any idea? Close to? Yeah, go. 1.3, correct, yeah. So that's what I figured out as well. We actually have more driver partners worldwide than people live in Novosibirsk, the third biggest city apparently in Russia. So it's quite important for us to allow you to build on top of the APIs because we have so many people driving with it, and we have riders and drivers that you can actually look forward to. In general, our Uber developer platform, we have a vision that's called Build Moving Experiences, and there are lots of different buzzwords in here. Obviously, moving, because we're a company that provides transportation, but also we say moving experiences because we want to create an emotional connection to the people that will use our service. We started in 2014 with our first API, and we had just a couple of partners that started off with us together, mainly like very customized API and endpoints. But we then started expanding more and more, and we have now 4 different APIs available to a ton of different partners. And today, the leading companies actually integrate with Uber in order to provide great experiences for their transportation. Now, our APIs, 4 different ones: ride requests, trip experiences, deliveries, and drivers. I will talk mostly about the trip experiences. The ride requests are fairly simple. It's, I want to get a ride, how much does it cost, how fast can somebody be here? And then trip experiences is, if I'm within an Uber, how can I provide a great experiences for the Uber rider? And deliveries is UberRUSH. That's basically, instead of transporting people from A to B, it is transporting things from A to B. And drivers is in order to allow our driver partners to have a better experiences overall, because we need to provide some services for them, and they have availability for like analytical tools and stuff. So in general, trip goes on from A to B. You start with a pickup, destination, and then a car comes, picks you up, drives you to the sole destination. However, there's always more to that. You can express an intent to ride before you actually ride, and then you can have your specific trip, and at the end, there's a post-ride action that we can execute. And we focus on the whole end-to-end lifecycle with our APIs, so you can basically do everything. You can help users make a decision in the beginning. You can offer them some opportunities and options to figure out what transportation might be best. And then you can execute that intent and actually create a ride request, so an Uber will pick up your users right away. You can enhance the user experience, the trip experiences, and then you can also analyze and get insights on like the rider profiles or the rider destinations where they're going, or also the driver profiles and which cities they're driving, and so on and so forth. Okay, let me focus on the intent to ride. So we have an API for the ride request, and it's mainly /products. You can just call it. You'll get some product options that are available in the city. This is different from city to city. So we have different Uber. I think in Novosibirsk we have just 2 available, Uber Select and UberX. But in many different cities we have different availability options. In Europe we have mostly Uber Pop, and then we have some very, very special ones in India as well. But you can get the products that are available for users if you just call that endpoints. On top of that, there's estimates for the price and the time that we just recently updated in terms of how we provide, how detailed the estimates are. And then if you want to execute an intent, you can basically say, hey, wait, just click on this. you can basically say you want to get a ride, and that goes through 3 different ways at least, or like 4. You can obviously call the endpoint right away. You can actually deep link into the Uber app. It will open up the app and then it will show the screen right away pre-selected with the options for your users. So they literally have to just do 1 click and say request. We have a ride request widget, which is basically an HTML5 native web app. It's built with React, in fact, and I will show you that later. And then we have a button. A button is basically provided by our SDK. So if you develop in Android or iOS, you can include our SDK. The SDK will give you some kind of a customizable view that you can plug and play right away, so you don't have to do all the API calls in the backend. It's fairly easy to integrate. And then enhancing the user experiences is trip experiences. 2 different things that are very, very important. We actually provide the intent to action. We have webhooks that you can subscribe to, and then you will realize if a status changes of a trip. So if a user signs up with an account and basically connects to Uber, you will be able to receive a webhook that will say, my user over here is now taking an Uber trip to this specific location. And then you'll get all those specific details that you might need in order to customize this great experience for them. One great example is hotels. You could get a webhook and know when your users are actually on the way to your hotel room. And then you could basically do some operational stuff like checking them in, providing them with the best setup for their rooms, and so on and so forth. So we try to integrate not only like during the ride, but expand this whole experiences into other fields. And analyzing and getting insights. Basically, as soon as the trip is finished, think of an archive of like history and transactions, things that happened. Receipts give you like details of how much was paid out. History is where people went from A to B, maybe what kind of locations they were going through, what kind of products they prefer, and based on that, you can build up maybe your interface or something. Cool thing that we had using the history endpoint is like a leaderboard of how many miles you're driving with Uber, and then you get like rewards if you're in the top 10. Apart from that, the post-ride is also very important for drivers. Drivers can actually be, you can use the driver's profile and get identity. And this is very important because the driver need to confirm who they are. We have somehow a lightweight process of actually onboarding partners, but you know specifically that your partner, this email address, the data is accurate, it's correct. So we provide identity for drivers, and we provide like a trip history and what cities they were driving. But on top of that, we also have payments. So you can figure out what kind of payments they're receiving, and you can also get a tax summary for them in case you want to provide like year-end services and try to help them provide the tax overview. You can use that as well. Now, Deliveries is really cool. Unfortunately, it's not available in Russia right now. Deliveries is basically the same as Uber for people, but just for things. And in a different world, in a delivery world, you would have quotes. So you basically say, I want to transport my pizza to a user that's living there, and then you get a quote. You use that quote, and then you create a new request to /deliveries, and then you'll basically get a confirmation saying, the Uber is on the way, make sure that your thing is getting ready, and then it can be transported right away. We have cool software, cool products using it. For instance, Shopify. I don't know if you ever heard of it. Shopify is apparently trending right now, and they use UberRUSH as a last-minute delivery, which means you can order something on Shopify and get it in like 30 minutes or an hour right away at home. And I think we're pretty much spoiled in Silicon Valley because we're kind of used to this whole 30-minute delivery thing with all the different products available. So that's an overview of what we have in general. Now here's a Deeplink, and here's how it could look like with 2GIS. You could have an overview of like the products, so you can click on one of the products we have, and then it will deep link into the Uber app, pre-selected with what you want to do. It will pre-select the product, it will pre-select where you want to go, from where you're going, and so on and so forth. And over here, just a breakdown of how this endpoint and usage might look like. The products, we will see, they will give you like a label that's translated, and you can just use it right away, plug it into your app, and you will see that. We also provide this icon that you can see over here, and that will basically be sufficient to build up some kind of a UI interface. Apart from that, there you go. We have a price estimation that's basically telling you how much it would cost for that specific route. If you care to transport somebody from A to B, it will tell you how much they would need to pay. And then the very last thing is obviously how much time will it take to get this Uber. So in 9 minutes, I could get my Uber, and then basically I could start my trip. Cool. Okay, there you go. I want to show you one cool example since I was talking about context platforms. We have an integration within Facebook. In Messenger, you can basically say, in a group chat, I want to actually ride to this specific destination. It will offer you an option to get a ride, and then you can request it. And there's also like this button. They're basically using our API endpoints. They're using our external API endpoints, and they provided this kind of solution with that just to show you what's possible. Yeah, this is just like, it gives you detailed information while somebody's on the road, and it will tell you in the chat, hey, your Uber is now there. You can like go outside and meet the Uber driver. Trip experiences, I'll talk about that a bit later, but I want to point out why it is so important. And this is something we think is really enabling many, many other companies to succeed. Right now, we have 2 billion trips done, and every trip on average takes 20 minutes, which means you have lots of time that people actually spend within an Uber. They spend a lot of time looking at their phone, talking to people, but our research study shows that many people actually look at their phone and consume different apps or data or something. Some people obviously talk. It depends on like the persona you might be looking at, but there's lots of time that could be used for re-engagement within your app. And we think the ultimate in-car entertainment is basically in your hands because you already have everything provided. You have like most up-to-date apps, you have enough internet connectivity most of the time, and you have all those things that you're used to. It's just like a native environment compared to maybe like car entertainment. So with the context that we provide with our webhooks, you can basically figure out when a rider has, oh wait, sorry, I jumped over this. When a rider has enough free time, how much time they might have in general, and where they're coming from and where they're going. Those kind of deals as you can get. Now, there are many cool solutions you can think of just with the data. Essentially, if somebody of you guys joined the Context First platform, our users express an intent, and that intent can be used by your app in order to make sure to provide the right things within your app. Now, you can basically say there might be a local guide who usually shows like the coolest restaurants in the city, but they most of the time don't have a way to figure out if people are on the road or like very specific have an intent to go somewhere. Now, if you integrate with Uber, you'll basically figure out where they're going. Based on that, you could probably match it with your destination and figure out what kind of location is at the destination, and then provide them with like special offers and can basically say, hey, you're arriving with this Uber, we have a table for you reserved, and you're like getting, I don't know, like this snack for free or something. So this really enables and changes the whole platform. We have one really cool example with trip experiences currently, which is Hoodline. Hoodline provides micro-targeted news, which means to the destination you're going to in the circle of, I don't know how many miles, maybe like 5 or 10 miles, they show you news that actually happened in the streets. Like literally they have a destination to each and every news article, and then basically can tell you, hey, you're going in that direction, like 2 blocks away, there was like a news article about, I don't know, something happening maybe on the streets or so. And then the other thing that you can think of is entertainment. If you know that users are going, for instance, to a cinema, you can provide them with very specific and targeted content and give them maybe like trailers or unique content that they could not get otherwise. One thing that we have as a really good example is Auto Radio. Auto Radio is, they do podcasts for people, and those podcasts have an AI in the background. They learn what you like. They understand what kind of themes you might be interested in, and then they show you like the most appropriate webcast, the most interesting for you. Now what they have is they have this one app where you basically can tap on this thing, and it's literally just one tap. You say, I want to use to a podcast for 58 minutes. And that's off trip experiences. Now they integrate with Uber, and what they can do now, they can basically figure out how much time a user would have, over here 60 minutes, and they specifically for that give you only content that's that long, for 60 minutes. And they also display you like the status of the trip, so people don't have to click and go back and forth between different apps. Another cool example is Internet of Things. You can think of everything that you have at home, some kind of home automation software. We have many different platforms coming up nowadays. I think Siemens is up there as well, Nest. You can think of something with Nest. For instance, this picture actually displays a thermostat that realizes you're going back home, and it knows that you will be at home in 20 minutes, and your Nest is smart enough to figure out how much time it will take to get to this destination temperature. They can tell you from 60 degrees to 72, it will take like 12 minutes, and if my ride is 17 minutes, well, I can wait for 5 more minutes before I turn on the thermostat. So that's how you can integrate with Internet of Things. And the post-write is identity, history, trips, and I already talked about that, so I will not focus on that too much. How do we help developers to integrate with this whole thing? We have a single sign-on. Essentially, everybody who has an Uber account can just tap on the single sign-on button. They will receive an authorization page, which is it's like an OAuth authorization page that you can see, and you can click through different scopes to understand what data might be exposed for the specific app. We have deep links, as already demonstrated. You can just click on it, and it will be pre-selected right away. Very easy for people, and they just use the native Uber app. Now, we also have something that's called Uber Button. The Uber Button is just like the view that you can put into your app. The Uber Button is actually pretty cool because it gives you all the things that usually users care about. You can just click on it and it will deep link into the Uber app, but it also gives you like the destination time, how much time it will take for an Uber to arrive, and also a price estimate. So you essentially instantiate this button and tell them, okay, this is my destination where if somebody's going, they might care about that specific product. Show me all the details, I don't care. And they will take care of it. The other cool thing is the widget that I already talked about, the HTML app, basically mimicking the Uber experiences. We just updated this widget, in fact, and it looks right now like the newest app, because this one does not have too many features, and as you can see, there's like no map and anything. But the newest widget actually provides you much more detailed view. And with that, you don't have to have anything installed. So essentially, you don't need any Uber app, nothing installed. You just click on it. It will handle authentication, authorization, and everything in the background for you, and will just provide you this Uber experience natively within your app. So since we're in this back-end talk, I want to talk about how we actually built our solution. And I want to highlight out a couple of things, because we have over 1,000 engineers building microservices for Uber, and our team, the developer platform team, is essentially building some of them. So you can think of like many different microservices exposed in the background, handling all this complicated structure with Uber, and the developer relations team hooks into some of the services and essentially provides a new layer on top of that, basically making sure that all the external API features are provided. And what we've seen in the past is that we started off as like the small team and just wanted to do write requests, basically just initiating a new write. But we realized after building one API that we need to have somebody within Uber who's acting as like a platform team and providing other teams to build APIs. Now we switched over. That's a fairly interesting switch. We switched over and basically said, we will now become a developer platform team, internal and external. Now internal, that means we have services for people to basically say, I have this microservice and I think it could be cool to expose it to developers. And we can say, well, that sounds amazing. Let me just show you how it works. And then they can run through like a playbook and easily configure a new endpoint, connect it to their microservice that they have, and they will get multiple things for free, like authentication, authorization with OAuth, load balancing, and all those kind of things that you need if you expose an external API. Now, let me talk about a cool thing that might be unique to Uber. Data storage with schemaless. We actually evaluated different options for data storage at Uber, and we started off with Postgres in the beginning. We used Postgres quite successfully until we had too many trips, more or less. There was too much load, and we experienced growth issues because we hired so many people. There were many different products coming up and many different features being built. So we said we need to reevaluate and figure out what we want to do next. Now, we ran through a whole analysis, and there's actually a blog post online of how the whole engineering team approached this. But essentially, we looked at MySQL and we said, well, MySQL is kind of cool. It would meet most of the needs that we have right now. However, there are certain things that we need on top of that. So what we did is we actually built data storage within Uber, and it's called schemaless. It's built on top of MySQL. It's a depend-only sparse 3-dimensional hash map. We had like 5 different goals in mind when we started building this. I kind of want to point out that we had most of the data stored at this point. That was like 2015, I believe. Most of the data that we were storing was related to trips. Everything else was maybe like user information, driver information, but most of the things were trips. So we needed to optimize for the trips. And there's certain goals we needed to accomplish. We wanted to have a linear scale. We wanted to basically say, if we add a new server, we want to have more storage and decrease response times. That's a fairly high requirement because it was not being able, Postgres just didn't help us with that. It didn't meet this requirement at all, so we had to just like put that away. Writability was very important for us. What we did in the past is we actually had a Redis server as a middleware before Postgres, and whenever we were not able to write something, we essentially had Redis trying to rewrite it with a backup algorithm and connect it again and retry, basically. Now we said, if we want to build something by ourselves, we want to have it included. We want to have writability enabled right away. The next thing, and I will explain on the next slide a bit more detailed, is notifications. Now, getting a trip and maintaining a trip sounds super simple. In fact, internally, it's a highly complicated thing because there's so many things happening in parallel, and you need to deal with like payments. You need to have multiple systems notified about dependencies that are happening. And we started with Postgres, as already said, so we got used to the secondary indices by Postgres, and we said if we want to actually switch off to something else, we want to start with the secondary indices and make sure that we can still switch for trips as we're used to. Now, the last thing is kind of unique because probably every company has that to some degree, but Uber basically said, well, we have mission critical data that we need to maintain, and if something goes down and like it doesn't really expose the things, it doesn't really react, and we don't know what to do. We said we actually need to have a team that built this whole service because we want to make sure that in the mission critical situations we can actually change something, and we have somebody who knows how this whole thing was implemented, which is why we basically started a new thing. Now here's a bit more detail how it works. We have over here like a trip time, and as you can see there's like a base setting where you request a ride, and then you have a billing. There's like sometimes fare adjustments if something goes wrong or the ride is too long or other things happen, and then you need to handle billing, payments, and then there are sometimes notes that you can provide. And this is only like the rider perspective. There's also a driver perspective and many different things that hook into this. On top of that, we have microservice that actually receives notifications. For instance, if you want to use a webhook, essentially this webhook is happening over here in the base. We'll get notified for the webhook, and then we kind of follow up with each and every status. And within schemaless, we stored it with a JSON blob. We have over here, you can see like the different fields that we have, base, rider, billing, and so on and so forth. They're not all, but we have multiple of those. And then you can see a JSON blob stored here. Now, the cool thing with schemaless is we actually have versioning right included in here. So you can basically say, the status just changed, I'm just going to push a new JSON blob in here, and then you will have like a history within the status. And that's the history that we essentially use for our external API as well. Microservices, I kind of wanted to point out that we have over 300 microservices, and we struggled a lot with discoverability. We also had specific requirements like client libraries. We wanted to build SDKs just for very specific microservices, and we had many different languages used. One of the Uber engineering culture values is let builders build, which means if you want to build a Go service, heck yeah, just do it. But you need to make sure that everything around it is kind of plugged in, and you need to make sure that you maintain that service. Now, since we have this kind of cultural value, people were starting building in like Node.js, Python, Go, and we had all those different things popping up left and right, but we had no unique interface, and we had nothing that actually deals with all the different services. And we had some other requirements like customization. You should be able to set a retry policy, and you should be able to like tune that based on the service, because sometimes services need to have a much tighter customized retry policy. So what we came up with is we actually started evaluating, and the whole engineering team wrote a blog post about this to actually 3 different blog posts. So if you care about the details, we have 3 different blog posts explaining why we use Thrift. We use Thrift as an IDL-based encoding protocol. So essentially it provides a definition for the interface. It's just like a language for an interface, and basically says how the service is structured, and we use this interface in order to make sure we have some kind of an orchestration between all the services that we have at Uber. And as we said, there are over 300. And the cool thing about Thrift is actually it gives you encoding, because it's an encoding protocol as well. So you get encoding, decoding, and you get compression as well. Now, we realized that with all the trips, we have many different status updates and many different things related to a trip that we need to store. So we didn't only look at like the definition language that we might want to use for a service, but we also looked at the communication patterns that we have. And we basically realized we need to compress to some degree, and we need to figure out what the most beneficial and efficient compression is. And we figured out over here, you can see that Thrift is actually fairly up there. looks pretty good, and that's why we kind of use Thrift. And on top of that, Thrift defines a JSON and basically says this interface will expose you this JSON, and this is how this JSON is structured. And based on that, we can actually fill schema-less and make sure that we have some kind of a structured approach in our data storage too. I think I don't want to talk about this because I actually want to explain to you how to use the Uber context. Fairly simple. Trip experiences, 4 different steps. You connect your user, you detect if somebody's on the ride, and then you get a context. At the end, you enhance your app. If you create an Uber app, you will have like a web interface. You can basically set a webhook URL, and we will send you a webhook to this specific URL. It needs to be HTTPS. And then you connect to user. User context is exposed through Auth 2.0, and the Auth 2.0 is essentially a way to securely expose a specific contest scope, let's say scope, a specific scope of your user. And over here you can see that somebody's requesting profile and saved places, maybe history, and requesting a ride. And then the user can say, I'm going to allow this app to use my data. And then at the end you'll get an access token. You match it with the user ID, save it in your database, and you can make calls to the specific endpoints that you have scopes for. Then, if this user starts a ride, since they're authenticated, we know that this user actually allowed you to get notifications, and we send you a webhook that looks like this over here. So you get like an event time, you get some more metadata, and you get a resource href that you can use to make your next API call. And you can basically use the metadata to match it up with your user ID that you have stored. And you use this user ID to get an access token, and then you can make API calls securely. So that's how it works in the background. Now, if you have all of this and you matched it up and you made this API call, you will get all this data over here that I'm talking about. ETA duration, if they're going from a specific destination that's predefined or not, and the latitude and longitude of their current location if they're on a trip. You take that access token, you get all of this. Like you get all the different information. If search is activated, if they're actually on a shared ride, which means Uber Pool. I believe we don't have Uber Pool in Novosibirsk, but if you have Uber Pool, you also get waypoints, and you can basically figure out what route the Uber Pool is taking, and you can understand what kind of, how they might travel through a city. And then you use it to enhance your app. So one very cool example that's already set is over here. It's auto radio. They use it specifically for the ETA, but we have other examples that actually use also the way paths. They figure out where you're going, and based on that, you could potentially show just like specific locations or maybe news in that related city. Okay, so we have a bunch of apps that built on top of our API, and there's much, much more. So I would like to encourage you to build as well. If you have something related to the transportation, I would love to have an application provided by you guys. And I think at this point, our technology is super simple to use, which is why people usually ask me why I talk about our API. It's fairly simple. It's just very few endpoints to use. People struggle most with probably authentication and authorization if they're not experienced with it. But in general, I think I would like to say that technology is actually not a challenge. It's just a simple API. The challenge is imagination and having the real cool use cases, the innovative use cases that actually use this data. So at this point, I would love to have some cool new APIs that use the trip experiences data to maybe enhance their whole experience. Please visit developeruber.com to get more detail, and you will also find like the technical blog post explaining the details of our discovery and exploration and how we got to the tech stack that we have currently at Uber. Thank you very much.
Вопросы?
Alexander, thank you for the talk. What are the limitations for the API? Is there any, I don't know, amount of calls or maybe?
Like details about our external API?
Yeah.
How we developed it? We are actually making a transition right now since we're switching over from a product to a platform. We rebuilt this whole service from the ground. And I don't know how much I'm allowed to share, but I can tell you that we're using Golang now for most of our external-facing API endpoints.
Okay, thanks. My question was about how many calls to your API can do in a second. Or in
how many calls we have? I can probably I don't know. That's a really good question.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know. There are quite a few API calls. We have right now a few data centers, and in fact, we're like in this phase where we need to re-implement some things, and we need to figure out how to do all active and like load balancing in between. But I cannot tell you how many calls we get. As a trivia fact, we have something within the Uber culture where we prepare for like specific days in the year, and then for that specific time, we run a stress test, and they should last at least like 5 times of the trips that we expect it to be. So we like, yeah.
Hello, thank you for presentation.
Sure.
Today was another presentation where I compared NoSQL solution for Postgres and MySQL, and MySQL shows less performant results than Postgres. So it seems strange that you switched from Postgres to MySQL. Do you know why? And my second question is, what was the most difficult tasks, problems which Uber faced?
Yeah. So the first question, I'm afraid I'm not the right person to ask, because we have over thousands of engineers, and some engineers that are super familiar with it made this decision. But it was mostly guided by the best practices that I mentioned over there. And I believe performance was probably very critical looked at, but then we had so many other requirements that we need to like deal with. So I think they just made some decision at this point. Probably some trade-offs as usual. And the second question is challenges at Uber in general with like API. I think the biggest challenge we have is maybe the culture we started off with. Since we have over 300 microservices, and we have more and more engineers on board over time, and we grew so quickly, so fast, we had multiple things that people need to take care of. And I think what was hard is to realize what kind of service exists in general. So discoverability was pretty hard, and we have some kind of a process in place more or less at Uber, where everybody who develops a new service or upgrades a service, they actually send to the whole engineering group an RFC, like a request for change. And that RFC lays out exactly how the service is like structured, what are the benefits, and what other services they use. And at this point, we basically require every engineer to look at it, and if they see like, oh, they're using my service, maybe I should talk to them. So that's how we try to like scale our culture in a more engineering fashion way. Yeah.
Hi, Alexander. Thanks
Sure.
for presentation. Tell me, please, right or not, in app you have listen radio, some music, or some content video, or and no matter what is content in case, yes?
Mm-hmm. Right now, we don't have that. I don't know if you already have seen the newest app. We have some things that you can look at, some things that will probably entertain you. Right now, there was a Snapchat filter, for instance. I think it was just enabled for the US. If you like travel from A to B, you get a very specific Snapchat filter. And then if there's like an event like Super Bowl, you will have a Snapchat filter that shows you the Super Bowl. But essentially what I'm trying to say is we have within Uber now a few cards that you can look through, and they kind of go into that direction of using something. I'm not allowed to tell you too much, but there's going to be a new product coming up fairly soon that will probably be directed in that direction. Right now we have like this buy model where we want partners to build and integrate within their app, and they should have like some Uber trip information and details. And then in addition to that, we have something within the Uber app that they can look at.
Thank you very much for the speech.
Sure.
Maybe I didn't hear, maybe you answered already, but could you please tell a main business goal for you to share an API? What do you want to have? New ideas to how to use your data, or maybe new engineers to your team, or what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have a couple of people that join Uber, and they strongly believe in the fact that you can grow as fast as possible if not you innovate, but actually people around you innovate. And the only way by enable people to innovate is by giving them the right product they can actually use. So we said, Uber cannot build anything themselves. Like we have a really cool product, but we cannot like have all those different side products and the synthesis of all the different things combined. So we said essentially we trust that there are smart developers that will just use our API and come up with really cool solutions. So we said our business goal is enable people to actually build on top of that. And initially, I think we made a transition. In the beginning, we said it's going to be write requests, and we want to like facilitate that more people actually use Uber and drive with Uber. But we switched away from the goal, and we have a different goal in mind now, which is just enable people as much as possible to use this context that they have about Uber.
Hi.
Hey.
Thanks for keynote. You said that there were 2 billion, right, trips?
Yep. Yes.
And it's for all over the
Worldwide, yeah.
Company's life, right?
Yes.
And I'd like to ask how many of them were made through some apps using this API? It's interesting question for me because all these pictures show the map of San Francisco, New York, or something where all this cool stuff are. And in Novosibirsk or many other Russian cities, they are not. All API usage I see is only through Google Maps or Yandex or some map services, but not this entertainment products. So
yes.
How many of them?
I believe we're not there yet for the entertainment products. We need to crack that first, but there are many apps that drive a significant amount of rides coming through their external API. We have obviously spearheaded a few partners, like Google Maps integration is completely integrated in there, 2GIS as well, and we have a couple of other things integrated with it. But I actually think we have a significant amount of all the partners, not even like the Google and everything else. We have other smaller companies that drive enormous growth for that. Like mostly it's related to transportation currently, if you want to figure out what kind of options you might have if you want to go from A to B. On the other side, I think we also see a huge uptake in UberRUSH and transporting things from A to B. So this is also like a business crucial thing that you can implement. And I wanted to point out that people understand how important UberRUSH is, because sometimes people don't really understand it. But if you're a company and you use UberRUSH, you're essentially replacing the whole logistics layer. Like you literally don't have to hire people anymore. You don't have to maintain cars. All of these things just provided by UberRUSH, and you just have this beautiful layer that you can just use from Uber. So we see a huge uptake there. People using like Shopify and those things. Unfortunately, UberRUSH is currently only available in the US, since we need to like train the drivers to make sure that transport things from A to B and not only people. Is that answering your question? As much as possible? Okay. Any other questions?
Есть время на один вопрос. Если нет,
No
то
questions.
давайте поблагодарим.
All right. Thank you very much, guys.